All of the physics of the past 60 years is wrong. Science is broken.
Three Body Problem is the new series from the creators of Game of Thrones, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss. All 8 episodes are streaming right now on Netflix, and we have watched the first 3. We are going to give our overall thoughts really quickly at the beginning, then we're going to talk about some of the events that happened in the first 3 episodes. But Patrick Klepek, before we get into the show, just worth pointing out, the show's kind of a big deal. You know, this is a big bet from Netflix. It costs around $20 million per episode. Game of Thrones, one of the most popular television shows of all time. And this is those creators' big follow-up to that. One of the shows that they've showrun since then. And so, yeah, it's a big bet. It's hugely ambitious, obviously based off of the set of novels that has become an international sensation. So let's talk about what we thought about the show. Patrick Klepek, should people watch Three Body Problem in one sentence or less? What do you think?
Contact, X-Files, Independence Day, Alien Invasion contact narratives are like one of my all-time favorite setups. It is the you just put that in front of me and I am going to feast. And so I don't know where Three Body Problem is going. We've only watched the first 3 episodes, but I find it set up really intriguing. I find the characters interesting. I'm a little mixed on the game format and how it's presented, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But on a very basic level, like putting aside the prestige, putting aside the cost, I am really enjoying this as a sci-fi premise, and I am fascinated to see if it can land any of its big ideas in a meaningful way. Too early to say, but it's enough that I want to see what the answers are or what's left in the rest of the first season.
I wish I could be there with you, Patrick. I want to be there with you. And there's a lot of people online who I respect who really love the show.
Yep.
I cannot say I'm among them. I think that the show has some really interesting ideas and a handful of interesting visuals, but overall, I found it to be somewhat poorly realized as a gripping sci-fi story. But I will say, if you are a hardcore sci-fi fan, if you're a hardcore fan of those kinds of stories that Patrick said, I do think you will enjoy this. That's who I would recommend this to. But other folks, I don't know as much. And I will try to articulate some of my issues with the show in this next segment. So those are my thoughts. Didn't like it as much. But if you're a hardcore sci-fi fan, I think you'll find things to enjoy. I do want to offer this other overall thought, Patrick Klepek, before we begin, which is that I'm struck by how unfavorably Three Body Problem compares to Shogun. These are both hugely ambitious TV shows with tons of characters, epic sweeping visuals, and really big weighty themes. And Shogun and Three Body Problem both originated with stories that were highly culturally specific. Shogun leaned into that and said, hey, we're going to have a show that's like 80+% subtitled and in a different language, and obviously takes place in a different time frame. And also, by the way, we're going to do a lot of our shooting outside and on elaborate, intricate sets. I'm sure they use CG as well. I'm not denying that. But you can tell that a lot of real physical work went into what they did on that show.
Mm-hmm.
Three Body Problem feels the opposite to me, right? Where if you're familiar with the book, they basically took characters that were Chinese and made them all different races, which is like, okay, I understand why you may want to do that, but it's just striking the difference between...
Better than making them all white, but not necessarily the path you have to choose. You know what I mean?
You're right, Patrick. They could have definitely gone that way.
They did this in the 90s. We know which path they would have gone.
This could have been like the Alive movie, a version
Exactly.
of Three Body Problem. But that's
then progress, David. That's progress. You got it. You got to mark it.
Thank you, Patrick. I'll be sure to note that. The other thing is that I think a lot of the show doesn't look very good. I think a lot of it looks like it was shot on the volume.
Ooh,
and
$20 million. Where? I mean, that is genuinely shocking to hear. I was unaware of that number until I started doing some reading on the show after having watched the first. Because I wouldn't describe the show as cheap looking.
It doesn't look bad, but it doesn't look,
it's one of those things where watching it, I wasn't thinking about the visuals. It's not a maybe I was in more of the gaming
I was,
sequences
because
that
I
were.
think sometimes they looked pretty bad. But overall, it's fine. Like
It's fine. It just
it's
if
fine.
you were to tell
You
me
know?
$20 million per episode, approaching, well,
Yeah.
actually, frankly, more expensive than many of the episodes that were produced for Game of Thrones toward the end of its run, where many of the episodes were just by sheer setup of plot had to be absolutely epic in scope and what it was
Yeah.
depicting. And this is somehow more. The volume was supposed to make things like more effective and cheaper, and it just seems like we've also gone. I don't know how to explain how shows can seemingly cost so much, and you used to be able to joke about, well, you see the money on the screen. It's like,
Right.
I
Yeah,
don't,
no, you don't really see it on the screen in this show. Again, there's some things that look really good, but some things look
Yes,
really bad, and
it kind of
it
just looks
basically
like a
ends up,
TV show. Like I
yeah,
just
it ends up
like,
being really mixed. It ends up seeming really mixed to me. Okay,
yeah,
well, so at the end of the day, I'm struck by how like this one show, in my opinion, Shogun, is just so much more successful at what it's trying to achieve than Three Body Problem,
yeah.
and I'm struck by like some of the decisions that they made to achieve those things. Those decisions could be coincidental or not, but it is something that that I think about when I watch both these shows. Let's talk about some of the stuff that happens in the first 3 episodes. Now, this is a sprawling show that takes place across multiple time frames and multiple characters, and so I'm going to try to like summarize this as best I can. The first plot line takes place in 1960s China. In the opening scene, a professor named Ye Zhitai is accused of teaching the Big Bang Theory, which, as anyone who watches television knows, you should never talk about. And he is then executed. His daughter, Ye Wenjie, is then sent to work in a labor camp. She is caught reading Silent Spring, an environmental science book, and taken to division headquarters and asked to sign a statement implicating more of her father's colleagues or else risk further extreme punishment. But before she can do that, she's taken to a place called the Red Coast Base, which can use her particular set of skills. She's a skilled scientist, and we basically discover Red Coast Base wants to make China the first country in the world to make contact with an alien species. Later, in episode 3, Ye Wenjie does make contact with one of the aliens, and even though they say, "Don't contact us back," she says, come on, aliens, come invade
this
us.
place is pretty bad. Like, how
Come
can that
invade
be
us.
any worse?
And Ye Wenjie has had a pretty tough life, and so we understand why she would make that decision. A few Chinese-related comments I want to make before we talk about like what actually happened here. I did send the screenshot of the opening scene to my parents and asked them to translate what was on those banners in the opening scene.
Oh,
And my dad sent back the translations. One of the banners says, renovate the party and build the party. One of the banners says, abandon the old and adopt the new. One of them says, eradicate the old world. One of them says, establish the new world. So there you go. There's some Decoding TV exclusive info here for you about
neat.
what was on those translations. I also want to say, anytime a white person speaks Chinese in this show, it's god awful. It's not. I think if you're not Chinese and you watch it, you're like, ooh, wow, they know how to speak Chinese, the foreign
Okay,
language.
I wasn't watching this in Boston on my iPad going, ooh, ow. But I will say,
I was directly speaking to Patrick at that moment, but yeah, it's
wow, just a targeted attack from space.
But yeah, I will tell you that
ignorance is bliss, though. That's what I will say. Like, the ignorance is bliss
yes.
in the sense that to not know allows you to probably, if not forgive, to look past something that for you, I have to imagine, like, might have been a little more grating.
Well, I think the effect on the viewer is supposed to be, oh wow, ooh, look at this guy, he can speak Chinese. But for me, I'm like, wow, that's some of the worst. Like, I don't speak Chinese particularly well, but it's way better than anything you hear on the show. The words are correct, but the intonation is all over the place. It's in general pretty bad. So anyway, that's just some Chinese commentary for you.
But I mean, to be like to build on that and your previous comparison, it's impossible not to look at a show like Shogun in comparison to this, where choosing to cast like predominantly like Japanese actors speaking like fluent like there are.
Yeah, but it's supposed to, the analogy in that show would be, why aren't they speaking Portuguese for real?
Sure,
shit, right?
Sure.
But because it's the white characters that are speaking the Chinese that's bad in this show, So
right, but they could have found characters they could have found actors who could have done that. What I mean is, broadly
or
speaking,
had actors spend literally more than 10 minutes figuring out how to say the words in Chinese correctly. You know,
Which
like
is,
that's
I guess, my broader point
Yeah.
is like Shogun is thinking very deeply about its use of language, and I think part of
Mhm.
what you're getting at here is that it's being a little flippant about its use of language in a way that is not necessarily like as respectful and as engrossing as it could be, given what it's trying to present.
Who knows how it all went down? You know, like maybe the white dude said the thing, and then and they clearly had a bunch of Chinese people on set, and no one wanted to say to David Benioff and DB Weiss, "Psst, hey, that guy's Chinese sucks." You know, like no.
Let's just ADR it later. You know, like come on.
Yeah, or it's good enough. It's good enough. You know, like who knows? Who knows? Anyway, all right. If you are Chinese and you disagree, by the way, feel free to comment at decodingtv.com or email me at decodingtv@gmail.com. But I was like, I was, you know, there's, I think it's one of the characters, Evans, is the one that speaks Chinese, right?
Mhm.
When he's young, and I'm like, wow, that is rough. If the only time I've heard rougher is when Ethan Hawke spoke Chinese in the Disney Plus original series Moon Knight.
Chisalela, Wakanida.
I don't know if you remember watching Moon Knight.
He did do that.
And it was like, and he spoke, and it was literally incomprehensible. Like I literally
Oh wow!
could not understand what it was not recognizable as Mandarin. Okay, anyway, we're off on a tangent. Patrick Klepek, what did you think of the stuff that took place in 1960s China?
Certainly the way it's shot is very striking. I thought it was I know nothing about the novels, the premise of the show, other than broadly speaking that it is a like alien contact narrative. And so to have the show situate itself so solidly in the past, and then of course as the show goes on through its opening 3 episodes, we are constantly revisiting this era. It is not just, hey, here's a flashback to one specific moment in time. We're never going to revisit it. The show is obviously solidifying this moment in time is very important to the kind of the ripples of the present, and probably what will continue to play out through the course of the narrative of the season. I mean, I found it all very shocking, very striking. I'm not, intimately familiar with that like period in Chinese history, and so I can't speak to like the authenticity of sort of like the emotions of the moment or what it's trying to depict. But for a show that is a show about aliens are going to visit. I was like, oh, okay. Like this is a pretty striking way to begin. That seems to have on its face nothing to do with what humanity's response to, contact from an extraterrestrial beings would be like. But it certainly grabbed me by the collar to start. If this is what it's saying is important to the beginning of this particular narrative, this particular interaction with aliens.
It's also just good to see this took place during the Mao. The Cultural Revolution took place during the Mao era, and I think it's actually good to see a depiction of what a repressive regime is like. I think that's just not very common in media in general. I think. And also to know what we want to try to avoid here in America. Like I think that's it's useful from an object lesson perspective. So I really thought this was all pretty well done. This is actually probably some of the strongest material in the show, in my opinion, was the Ye Wenjie stuff and how she's just in a terrible situation. Her father is executed, and then she needs to go work, and then she's like, "Hey, you might be in an even worse situation." Her significant other freaking hangs her out to dry, which is pretty rough. Not a great depiction of Asian male courage there, right? When
no,
she,
I constantly found myself wanting to spend more time in this era of the show. I find the dynamics, like I think there's a lot of characters we're juggling as we get to sort of the present day stuff, and I don't find any of them as singularly interesting as this one character set in 1960s China. I would have been, again, I have no familiarity with the adaptation happening here, and like whether what it's choosing to highlight or not highlight is like how that fits within the puzzle pieces of the original narrative of the trilogy of novels. But just taken as like the show in front of me, more often than not, I was thinking to myself, I certainly would have been more interested in the structure of this show that was maybe leaning heavier on this, and then had a big, jump cut later to the present that sort of dealt with the consequences, because I just feel like there's a lot of left on the table in terms of what's so interesting about what this particular character is going through. And often it feels like, well, we're jumping back there mostly for a plot reason. We got to like explain something more that's happening back here in the present. And I think that's a little unfortunate, because that world is just so, well, like you said, we don't see it depicted very often. And so this version of the present, I've seen versions of this many times before. I've seen people contact it.
You've seen stuff in the present, Patrick?
But again, any sort of alien contact narrative, I've watched so many movies, television shows that have done versions of this. I haven't seen versions of this done juxtaposed against the Cultural Revolution. It's just an interesting place for a story like that to be set. And I'd be far more fascinated to spend more time there than the show is interested in doing.
I do think it's interesting that a lot of conservatives love this show. They are saying, "Oh, this is what happens when communism." And that's not completely unfair, but also this is also what happens when science is not valued. When we live in an era of anti-intellectualism. And that arguably is a stronger animating path than communism to get where we got at the beginning of this show. So
agreed.
I think lessons for all to be found in this series. So yeah, we agree. The 1960s China stuff really compelling. Probably looks, in terms of how it actually looks, it probably looks the most compelling. It looks like they actually shot some of this stuff outdoors and on these intricate sets. So I at the Red Coast base. So I really liked the stuff that took place in the 1960s. Now, of course, we're spoiling the first 3 episodes, so I will say that Ye Wenjie does survive until the modern day. It's a big reveal that she is Vera's mother, character played by Rosalind Chow in the modern day era. So, who, as of the first 3 episodes, is not really a major character yet. So, we'll find out what her role is going to be in the days to come, or the episodes to come. In the present day, 5 friends start encountering strange phenomenon that's generally triggered for them by the suicide of a scientist named Vera Ye. There's Augustine Augie Salazar, played by Isaac Gonzalez, who starts getting visions of an ominous countdown and is told to shut down her nanofiber research or else. There's Saul, who has kind of a vague romantic history with Augie, who used to be a brilliant scientist, but now spends most of his time drinking and trying to hook up with women. There's Will Downing, a physics teacher who gets pancreatic cancer, and that's most of his storyline for now. And there's Jack Rooney, a Playboy-esque figure who got rich off of a snack food empire. We'll also talk about Jin Cheng and her role in a moment. But Patrick Klepek, I'm curious. This is one of the biggest changes from the book. In reality, like in the book, these 5 characters are kind of derived from one character in the first book and also from characters in future books, right?
Interesting.
And they'll kind of mesh them into this one group of people. And so I'm curious, did this work for you? They're called the Oxford 5 because they're kind of like, these are the 5 people that are critical to the plot that's unfolding right now. What did you think of the Oxford 5, and did you find any of these characters compelling?
It feels so early to say, like, they're compelling enough is what I will say, right? Like, this is part of what has led me to be interested just broadly in the mysteries that the show is presenting in front of me, especially as someone that does not know where any of this goes in the books. I'm fascinated to find out how this version of an alien narrative, so like communication narrative or invasion narrative, unfolds. And so there's not much to any of these characters this far in, but I also don't hold that against the show too much at 3 episodes. That's, maybe that's something that would, like, would it shock me if I got to the end and it's like, these were a lot of convenient, plot device characters meant to move the puzzle pieces along? No, that wouldn't shock me. I could certainly see that arc for these characters if they remained as sort of surface level as they are. But I think there's so much heavy lifting in terms of just getting the broad premise. Like, we were behind the scenes. Originally, you and I talked about watching the first 2 episodes. Then you dove in because I was out of town and said, hey, I think it actually makes a lot of sense to watch the first 3 episodes because it really feels like the first 3 are establishing
Right.
broadly
This is
speaking,
kind
kind
of
of a
what this
pilot.
is.
Like
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
what the show. Like if you were to put the title card at the end and it said 3 body problem,
Right.
like it feels like that's what's sort of happening at the end of the 3rd episode. And so I'm willing to give the show a little bit of rope because it feels like pieces are just being arranged on the board for the show to then dive in to some of the messier philosophical science character problems that are set up. So it works enough, but I'm not necessarily going to sit here and sing the praises of any of these particular characters. Obviously, Augie is sort of the focus because of the fact that she is sort of picked to be someone who is cursed with this countdown that is in her visions.
What did you think of the countdown, by the way, Patrick? Because apparently, from the book, it's supposed to be terrifying. And
it is it terrifying if they show it every 30 seconds? You know what I mean? Like I understand what they're going for, which is, do you think she's not seeing it now? She's seeing it now. Do you think she's not seeing it now? She's seeing it now. Look, I don't know how I would be interested to read a passage from the book that described what they're trying to visualize. I can't imagine it is difficult if we're just take away how the book describes it. It's just, hey, numbers, spooky, in your face. That just seems like a difficult thing to pull off. The problem is the way I'm not a filmmaker, I'm not a scriptwriter, but the way I might do that, if it's like, dude, this is really hard to make like the numbers seem scary. Maybe don't show me all the time, because the answer was like we couldn't make them that scary. But like this is what we came up with. Do you want to see it all the time? It's like, no, not really. Just let the actor, who's totally fine. I'm not blown away by her performance, but she's totally, I think, competent with the material put in front of her. Let her reaction to being surrounded by this instill me with imagination of what that horrifying must be, because instead the show is just constantly like, she looks a little scared. You want to see it? Oh, it's not that scary. Damn, we shouldn't have shown it to him. Next time we'll get him. And that, I feel like the show, I get the show is convinced it's showing you what is scary. It's not spooky. It's just not as scary as the show is conveying. I imagine you fell into a similar sort of pattern with it.
Well, speaking more generally about the Oxford Five, counterpoint to what Patrick is saying, the characters are bad and you should feel bad, Patrick. you're saying, yeah, I mean, we're 3 episodes in and not a single one I give a shit about, but you know what? That's okay. I'm sure it's going to get better from here.
I'm okay. See, here's the thing. I'm okay with high concept sci-fi having lackluster characters. Like that is you mentioned at the top, hey, the hardcore sci-fi people might get something out of this differently. And look, much like horror, sci-fi is a genre that often is better at its high concept ideas than it is at pairing that with compelling characters. The best versions of that, look, if you've never seen Contact, if you watch this, you're like, gee, I love this idea. Go watch Contact. Contact is my all-time favorite. Like
you're saying, Patrick's saying, we already have a good version of this story.
We do.
You don't need another good version. You don't need another good version of this. I think the characters are mostly really irritating.
Okay.
Like that's kind of their primary characteristic. There's a Reddit post on the 3 Body Problem subreddit entitled, "This is written from a woman who loves women but hates poorly written female characters."
Okay.
Augie. And this person writes on Reddit, "The writers went out of their way to continuously show Augie emasculating Saul, I guess in an attempt to make her seem strong, but for me she only came off as an entitled, ungrateful, rich a-hole who had everything handed to them the moment they wanted it. A second time she calls Saul, wakes him up in the middle of the night, telling him to come over. Might I remind you they are not together. Despite being with another woman at the time, Saul drops everything for Augie, tells her he's on his way, but that's not enough for Augie. Nope. She hears the woman he's with in the background and hangs up on him after demanding he come to comfort her. She constantly treats him like crap, like he was beneath her, and Saul was really the king of simps for letting Augie treat him like a nuisance / child when he showed up for her time and time again," end quote. Augie's not the only annoying one, though. I mean, Saul barely has any characteristics at all other than he likes, drinking and partying, which is like, who doesn't? And Jack Rooney, just like overall kind of an irritating character who at the end of the third episode makes what, in my opinion, is an inexplicable decision to not find out more about what these people are selling. They've designed what, in his opinion, is one of the most advanced headsets ever known to mankind. And he's like, yeah, whatever. These guys are kooks. They have no idea what they're talking about. It's just like, what? I don't even buy that as his decision at that point in time. The Oxford Five suck. That's kind of my position on it. Exception, whatever. Will Downing, I know nothing about him. So he has pancreatic cancer. I wish him the best.
I
But
wish this fictional character the best. Hope it works out for you, buddy.
but I don't know anything about him. And then
the show
and
gives
then
him nothing to do except just be sick and sad.
Except be sick so far. And then Jin Chang is cool, and we'll talk about her in a bit. But yeah,
yes.
In general, this is hugely unsuccessful as a set of major characters for me.
Which is again, this is it's fascinating to compare this to Game of Thrones, because Game of Thrones, high concept fantasy show. What does it get right off the bat? Like compelling characters that you care about. So as the fantastical elements ramp up, you don't, at its best, you don't lose sight of that. Here, there is such a deep emphasis on the high concept part of it, and the characters don't back that up. And then for me as the viewer, to some degree, it's how much do these particular high concept ideas work for you? How much are they carrying you relative to the lack of character work? And so I don't even necessarily disagree with your interpretation or reaction. I just find, as someone who enjoys these types of narratives, I wonder if someone has a different version of what does humanity do when they encounter an alien species. It just doesn't rise to the level of irritating me. Part of the reason, because what I'm coming for is, it sure would be nice if they had better characters, but I don't really care that much if they get there. Because for me, the satisfaction is the alien narrative. And if the characters get there, great. If it's a clever spin on alien contact, we've already met my threshold for what is interesting in these narratives. And
all right.
I use that as a comparison to something like horror, because that is often what I'm experiencing in that. That's my other sort of genre that I'm often playing around in, is hey, Hope has got some interesting ideas. Characters, they'd be great, but that's not usually what I'm getting here. And then when you get both, you get something like Game of Thrones. I'm not confident they're going to get there yet, but it hasn't rise to the level of, gee, I wish these characters are better. Nothing about this show works for me, which it sounds like you got to at a very accelerated rate. You also want the aliens to invade and end everything. No, just come. These characters don't mean anything. Let's end this show. Season 2? No way.
Let's talk about Jin Chang, who is gifted a strange Apple Vision Pro-like headset that used to belong to Vera. A lot of the first few episodes involves her playing the game, which we later learn is a recruitment tool that's being overseen by Mike Evans, a mysterious billionaire that may have his own intentions for what's going on. Later on, Jack Rooney also joins her in the game. Now, Patrick Klepek, I have to say, I found this game stuff to be indecipherable, and I found solace in the Wikipedia description of the game that's derived from the book. So I'm going to read that so people know what we're talking about here. So the game portrays a planet whose climate randomly flips between stable and chaotic eras. During chaotic eras, the weather oscillates unpredictably between extreme and cold heat, sometimes within minutes. The inhabitants, who are portrayed as having human bodies, seek a way to predict chaotic eras so they can better survive. Unlike humans, they have evolved the special ability to dehydrate themselves, turning themselves into a roll of canvas. They do this in order to lie dormant when the chaotic eras occur, saving valuable resources that otherwise would have been wasted. A second individual is required to rehydrate their body, as self-rehydration is not possible. Characters resembling historical figures, including Aristotle, Mozzi, and Isaac Newton, fail to produce a model for the planet's climate as multiple civilizations grow and are wiped out by large-scale disasters. Jin ultimately realizes the planet is part of a system with 3 suns, whose distances from the planet and thus their appearance and disappearance in the sky are stochastic and hard to predict. When 2 suns are far away and the alien planet orbits the third, the climate enters a stable era. When the planet is too close to 2 suns, the climate is disrupted, causing a chaotic era. If it's close to all 3 suns, a planet-wide firestorm occurs. If all 3 suns are distant, the planet enters an ice age. Eventually, at a future time impossible to predict, the alien planet will collide with one of the suns and be consumed. The game shows the aliens building and launching colony ships to invade Earth, believing that the stable orbit will allow unprecedented prosperity and let them escape the destruction of their planet. End quote. I think that was all covered in the show. I think there might be like one or two details that were outside the scope of what.
But quite broadly speaking, I think that's
Broadly
where we
speaking,
end up.
that I'm just worried about spoilers for you, but like I think that was largely what was it. Patrick Klepek, you are literally one of the top gaming experts in the world.
That's unfortunate. Apologies.
What did you think of how this show depicted its gaming sequences?
Oh, I hate it. I hate it. But I hate every piece of media that does this. I don't think it's possible to do particularly well. I think it is. I'm trying to think of like the best instances I can remember of like games incorporating or movies incorporating video games is when they just incorporate actual video games as opposed to trying to recreate the experience of what a video game is and there's just again, I haven't read the book. I don't know how it depicts it. Maybe it's easier in text for you to imagine what it might work, but here it's just cheesy. Like it's just impossible to take seriously. Every time we're in the game, I get out of the game. I don't take the helmet off. And when we got to sort of an explanation of why we're in the game, that's fine. But like all I'm rooting for is, well, I hope the rest of the show doesn't spend a significant amount of time in the game. David, I have a strong suspicion the rest of the show is going to significant amount of time in the game. The moment they put it on the first time was like level 1. It's like, oh, shut the fuck up. That's not even how games are depicted. You're trying to depict like a God of War third person action adventure style thing. Those games don't do.
They don't do level 1. You don't say level 1 at the beginning of God of War anymore.
And I don't also want them to put up the like gaudy UI with like a mini map in the corner and like quest markers with compass like that one. I think it's incredibly challenging to depict what they are trying to do, which is to drop in real life actors into a highly realistic depiction of a virtual world. That is just. Look, man, Steven Spielberg tried to do it with a flawed book. Ready Player One is trash. Like, it's a trash book. It's a trash movie. It's hard to do. Spielberg can't do it. Stop trying. And so I just fundamentally think you are...
You object to the premise.
I object to the premise, but I also understand I'm so engrossed in video games. Like, it is so part of how I think about the universe. I spend so much time in them as someone who studies and reports on and talks about the medium. How that works for other people, like a general populace who's just, video games are a normal part of their diet, a thing they do occasionally, as opposed to having built a career around. Maybe that doesn't rise to the same level of irritation. So it doesn't work for me. Once we're in it and they're dropping less of the gamey stuff, it's fine. It just feels like we're in. This is where they spent a lot of the money in the show. And I can't see it. It's like this is where it's like, hey, you're going to take me to a far off land. At least make it seem visually interesting and arresting to look at. And I just don't think this show accomplishes that. So it kind of fails as a depiction of a game and as a like imaginary alien landscape. It's also just not that interesting or compelling to look at.
I think it fails on every level. It fails from a visual perspective, as you've indicated. I think also just the ideal is you as the viewer feel like, oh, I'm playing the game with these people, right? That's why game shows are popular, because you are playing along with people, right? And so ideally you're like, oh, I'm part of this problem solving as well. And first of all, I can barely even comprehend what problem is being asked of. Like, basically, what I'm saying is there's no way the viewer could have gotten to where the characters got to.
No.
Even nowhere even close, in my opinion. And that to me indicates that this is completely failed. So not a fan of the game stuff. But anyway, they tried. There's also obviously a subplot in this show where there's a detective named Clarence, played by Benedict Wong.
Oh, he's great.
He's great. He's trying to uncover the situation along with his boss, Thomas Wade, played by Liam Cunningham. So that's also another thing that's going on. But Patrick Klepek, we're getting to the end of our conversation here. Any other thoughts or anything else you want to point out about Three Body Problem before we wrap up our first chat about the show?
Well, we breezed past it's just there, but I love Benedict Wong, amazing actor. Anytime he shows up in something, I'm always just delighted, able to balance between dramatic and comedic, and it's just an expressive face. Just somebody that, like, the moment I see that in a cast, I am just immediately more interested in watching it, because, and so to have him have a more like a meteor kind of straight role where he's not, it seems like a lot of times he's been cast after kind of getting popularized by a lot of like being a sidekick in the Doctor Strange films. It's like, like he's so funny, and he's very funny, but it's fun to see him play just sort of this like this kind of weird dirtbag cop that's been fired from a bunch of different places. And I there's a different version of this show that I kept imagining in my head as I was watching it, which was, what if way less more of the Oxford Five, as you called it, way more of the...
Did you say way less more? You mean way...
Well, no, I was, way less of the Oxford Five.
Yeah,
way
yes.
more of
Yeah.
the era in China, of 1960s China.
Yes.
Way more of Benedict Wong piecing together, like using 1960s China as a way to like give the audience a little bit more than what the characters in the present have. But it's largely a story of Benedict Wong trying to realize, why are all these physicists and like high level scientists killing themselves? And we're getting like little details of how we would arrive at something like that through the lens of this very different landscape, 1960s China. And like, again, I'm not trying to rewrite a show that doesn't exist and rewrite a book that had its own narrative, but the strengths, if I'm looking at the strengths of the show, the stuff I responded to the most as I was watching, it was whenever we were doing the sort of the detective stuff and whenever we were sitting in 1960s China.
Yeah.
And the show is just so much more interested in the Oxford Five, and the game stuff, right? The game stuff.
Right, yeah.
It is not as though like, hey, this is a plot device that we're going to dance around. It is central and key, and it is a huge part of the visual storytelling. And I just don't think that stuff is particularly strong, and the other stuff is at least stronger. And I just kind of found myself doing my own three-body problem of trying to rearrange the pieces of this show into one that I think would have been stronger given its core elements that are in front of me.
Agreed completely. I actually don't think we disagree that much about the show anymore. And I think those are also the things that work the best for me in the show, and we'll see how the rest of the show evolves. So, Patrick Klepek, question for you. We're going to start ending our segments this way. I'm going to ask Patrick Klepek, is this a show we're going to continue watching week to week and recapping on the podcast, I should say? Is this a show we'll keep watching and recap at some point in the future, or are we going to stop right now?
We're not going to stop. We're also not going to do it next week. It's right in the middle there.
Yes.
We're gonna watch the rest of it and revisit it 2 weeks from now. We've had a chance to kind of let everyone sit with it as well, and I think it will be worthwhile to see how quickly we get like any sense of a renewal, given how expensive some of the discourse around the viewership of the show. This is a very interesting pivot point for Netflix as a company as well, and what it represents. And so I think giving this show time to marinate for us, for the audience, and also what it means in the television culture, I think 2 weeks is a good spot to revisit kind of where we're at with Three Body Problem.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.